So we're now going to build a server up with Forge, and we're going to take a look at a few other things as well, like the nginx config. We're going to remove the default site and create a new site, which is going to work with our domain, and just get this ready to go basically. So once you're on this screen within Forge, we're going to choose DigitalOcean just here. So we're creating a DigitalOcean server, and we're now going to choose some of the options here. So the credentials, it's just personal, there's no other option. We're going to choose a name for this, and I'm just going to call this Instacademy. That's the name of the site I'm using. I'm using that domain as well. And the server size is really up to you. I'm just going to choose the lowest one since this is just an example, but obviously you can ramp it up if you need to. You can always upgrade this later via DigitalOcean's control panel, so it doesn't matter too much. So the region, again, choose the region that's closest to your audience or the majority of your audience. We're not going to be talking here about using a CDN, which is a content delivery network. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose London for now. So the database name you can change. We're going to leave it at Forge. It doesn't really matter. You can change this around if you want. So you could give it the same name as your business or project or whatever. But let's just leave this at Forge for now, so it's a lot easier. So there are a couple of other options. We can provision this as a load balancer, which we're not going to be covering. That just allows you to set up a load balancer really easily. You can install PHP 7 as well if you want. You can install HHVM and Hack. But again, we're going to just leave all of these options and just set this up in a very basic way. And you can also enable backups, which will enable backups on DigitalOcean. So you might want to go over to DigitalOcean and just read about what that involves. So let's hit create server. This is going to take quite a while to do, and we can see this building down here under active servers and also recent events. It's just listening for events. So basically what's happening here is it is building, and then it will provision the server. And once this is done, you'll see this go green, and then we can start to actually do all of the fun stuff with it. So give it a while, wait for this to finish, and we'll pick up in just a second. So hopefully now your server has fully built and provisioned. What we can now do is go ahead and look more into detail. Now you should have also got an email through with some information about the server, the IP address, the username you'll use to log in via SSH, and also the sudo password and the database username and password as well. So keep this handy. We'll be using it a little bit later to go ahead and SSH into the server. So in terms of actually managing this server then, we can either click this button here, or we can go up to a list of the servers we have. So into the detail of them, we're going to just take a quick look around here as to what we have. So the sites here, we're going to be modifying this in just a moment. These are basically just each kind of, it says here, each domain on your server. So we're just going to be dealing with one, but obviously you can have multiple sites served on one server. Usually not recommended, but we're just going to be removing this default site and adding instacademy.com as our main site. We also have this SSH key section, which allows us to add a public key, and that will allow us to SSH over. We'll be looking at doing that in the next part. We also have things like the scheduler. We can obviously run a command. In this case, it's the artisan schedule run command. And this will allow us to basically run one cron job, and this will run Laravel scheduler if we want to set up any commands. Now we'll go straight over to the network tab. This is pretty useful. At the moment you can see that we've got firewall rules for HTTP and HTTPS, obviously on port 80 and 443, and this is allowed from any IP address. Now what you can do is, if you're say installing Elasticsearch and you need to test this locally, what you can do is go ahead and type in Elasticsearch here, type in say 9200, and then from IP address, that would be your IP address. But for now, this is all we need. We've got HTTP and HTTPS set up, and we can't access anything else but them. So we also have monitoring, so we can actually install monitoring. So for example, New Relic, we can use Paper Trail, and a couple of other services here. But basically, this we're not going to go into, but if you need to do it, it's there. For example, for New Relic, you can paste in your license key. This will set everything up on the server for you. You won't even need to go into your server, and then you can start monitoring your server with New Relic. We also have things like Meta as well, which is like the server metadata. But again, this is not always going to be used. For example, the max file upload size, you can go ahead and change this. But the most important thing we want to do is delete this default domain. So we're going to go ahead and remove this, and we're going to create a new one. So if you already have a domain, we're going to actually attach this later on to this, or point this to this server. So my domain is instacademy.com, and it's important here that we type in the actual domain for what we want to access this from. The reason for that is it'll update our nginx config, which we'll look at in a moment, and it'll allow us to respond to requests that come from instacademy.com or whatever your domain name is. So let's go and click add site. You can allow wildcard as well, subdomains as well, and you can see that's going to go ahead and installing, so we'll just wait for that to finish. Okay, so that's now set up. Now, interestingly, if we grab the IP address from just up here and we go ahead and try and access this site now, you'll see that we get a 404 not found. And the reason for this is if we head over to our nginx config, we can go over to our site here and we can modify the nginx config for this site. So if we go to edit files and then edit nginx config, and we'll look at this site area in just a moment because it's slightly different. You can see the nginx config is listening on port 80 and the server is instacademy.com. Now, if you did want to access it via the IP address initially, just go ahead and paste the IP address in there, and that's basically going to serve this here. So this will be found. So if we just go and save this out, and if you ever want to restart nginx or any other service, you can go ahead and do it down here. So for example, I could restart nginx. That's very quick, so that will just go ahead and restart. And when I hit this, you see that we get this file here. Now this is just a file that's created by Forge when we first create our server. So we're going to delete this later. Obviously we don't want anyone to be able to access this. But you can see now that by changing our nginx config, we can access this by our by the IP address, but we can also access it by the domain. So what we're actually going to be doing is we're going to go back over to our site section. We're going to change this nginx config back over to instacademy.com because we basically only want requests to be responded to from instacademy.com. So we can go ahead and save that out again. And again, we can go and change or restart our nginx server as well. So we'll just go ahead and do that now. There we go. So now we're going to go over to sites, and you'll notice that we have servers and sites. So what's the difference? Well, obviously a server is just one physical, I guess, server. And then sites, you can have multiple sites on one server. So you can have 2 different domains, 2 different websites on one server. So this is where you manage your sites. And in here, we've got stuff like the ability to install a repository. We're not going to be doing that because we're going to be installing the repository later on Envoyer, which is going to deploy the files to this server. So you can actually install a repository directly here and deploy from here, but we're not going to be doing that. You've also got things like environment as well, but we're not going to be doing that here either. We're going to be doing that on Envoyer. And you've got things like queuing up workers, SSL certificates, which is pretty straightforward to go ahead and set up. And we've also got the meta, which is basically the web directory where things are served. We're going to be modifying this a little bit later because Envoy creates some different directories for us. So that is pretty much setting up a server and a site on Forge. We're pretty much now ready to go to start adding our domain name so we can actually access this server via instacademy.com or whatever your domain name is. Then we can go and look at setting up Envoyer, linking our GitHub account in, and actually deploying any new changes to this server.